Hi guys, welcome back to the Social Tune and a brand new episode of Record Roundup. You know, considering how often I do these episodes, I'm thinking of adding some kind of regular jingle to this. I'll see what I can come up with, and it may take a few weeks, but hey, we'll see. Anyway, while knocking out two of these consecutively a couple of weeks ago gave me a brief moment of respite to review those Kesha albums, since then my schedule's been filled up again, so it looks like you'll be getting a couple more of these now, okay? And this was a week of expectations, for better or for worse, where I was either dreading or anticipating every single album here. And as usual, I'm really late to the punch on pretty much all of them, but you know what, some of these records took quite a few listens. So rather than worrying about all of that, let's just dive in. Oh, I was looking forward to this one. When it comes to fun, catchy, and experimental pop music, everything is everything you could hope for. They're smart, they write about interesting topics, and they have a knack for sticky hooks that means I really enjoy listening to them. Their last album, Get to Heaven, just missed my list of the best albums of 2015, and believe me, in a weaker year they would have made it. And even then, songs like Spring, Sun, Winter, Dread, Distant Past, and especially the title track really did stick with me, as that last one actually made my list of the top 50 songs of that year. But that was then, and this is now, and on this album, Everything had announced that they'd be taking their sound in a bit of a different direction. Okay, I like their last album, but who knows, a change in sound might work, right? Unfortunately, no, I don't think it did. Because for as much as I do love this band, this is simply not all that remarkable as a follow-up. And for as much as I do encourage experimentation in pop music, this is one of those rare occasions where I'd actually encourage the band to go back to their old stuff. Now, that's not to say that this new sound is bad, it's just a lot less interesting. What this album tries to do is to fuse everything's weird experimental attitude towards pop music with much more conventional beats and production. You still get the great falsetto from Jonathan Higgs and a bunch of odd lyrical choices that really do paint a great word canvas, but it all feels kind of stilted, kind of off, while not being anywhere near as catchy as their past releases. And when this album does click, it does do well on songs like Can't Do and Run the Numbers. But more often than not, it just kind of falls flat. So, in good conscience, I'm afraid I can't give it more than a strong 6 out of 10. Believe me, I wanted to love this, but in the end, I just can't. Sorry, guys. Not even 3 months after dropping their huge debut, Brockhampton returns with their follow-up, Saturation 2. And while yes, I do find that impressive, I'm also well aware that this marketing gimmick is living on borrowed time. For one, that first album has faded on me quite a bit since I heard it back in June. It really shouldn't have made my mid-year list. But for another, flooding the market, saturating it, if you will, with new music will only guarantee that people will get sick of you a lot more quickly. Hell, look at Drake. I used to call myself a fan of that guy, now I dread every single song he drops. But public opinion aside, Drake is also evidence of another symptom of overflooding the market, namely a noticeable decline in quality in his music. And unfortunately, with Saturation 2, I'm afraid I'm starting to see the same thing happen with Brockhampton. Now, before you berate me in the comments, let me stress that this does not mean that the album is bad. No, in fact, I think that this album is really good. It's just not as good as their debut, even for someone like me who has gone off that album quite a bit. Songs like Fake, Gold, Cash, Face, and Heat are all extremely catchy and stick in my head to this day. And sure, this album does have some sticky hooks on songs like Swamp and Gummy, but they're just not as catchy, and on top of that, a lot of what Brockhampton delivers here is eerily similar to their first album, even lyrically. This means that this is basically a clone of their first album, meaning it has less impact than the first one, and is made even more obsolete by the fact that it's not as memorable. Like I said, this is a really good album, and if you want to hear more of the same, this album will probably satisfy you. But for me, it's only a like 7 out of 10. I want Brockhampton to stick around, but if they want to do that, they're going to have to evolve. And with Saturation 3 already in the works, I get the sinking feeling that they're not planning on doing so anytime soon.
What in the cup? What in the clouds? Feet
people, this is probably one of the most anticipated records to be released in 2017. Sure, the first single was a little different from what everyone was used to, but they were going to get back on track soon. Plus, the album was being produced by Mark Ronson, who was responsible for the massively successful Uptown Funk a couple of years ago. And with a title like Villains, how could this not be awesome? Well, I'm coming from a bit of a different background because I was honestly really late in checking out this band. They've been making music for decades, but I've never really found the time to listen to them. So while many fans and critics were calling this a big disappointment, I went in with a bit more hope. After all, I actually loved The Way You Used to Do, so maybe this is one of those rare cases where having less context actually helped me appreciate the album more than most. And ultimately, no, that's not the case. In fact, listening to this album made me all the more eager to check out the rest of their work, because from what I understand, it's way more interesting than this. Because yeah, I didn't really care for this. In fact, it kind of frustrated me. Because look, I can see potential in this idea. It's just bursting at the seams, trying to break free. Except it can't because this production simply won't allow it. Yeah, if I'm going to assign the blame to anyone, it's Mark Ronson. And look, I've liked his production in the past, but it just doesn't work well with this brand of music. See, tight grooves are great, as long as they're raw and have a bit of an edge to them. But unfortunately, all the guitars on this album seem to be compressed with a rubbery effect that really doesn't work well with this brand of rock. You would expect Queens of the Stone Age to go balls to the wall with an album title like Villains, with loads of shredding and solos. And they do that, but all of it feels so processed that I get no thrill from it. I'll even say that most of the bass compositions here are really solid. You can definitely tell that Queens of the Stone Age wrote this music. But the production doesn't do it any favors, and to be fair, it's not like the band is entirely blameless. Josh Homme is great as always, but unfortunately the words he's spouting aren't all that impressive. Again, with an album title like Villains, you would expect the lyrics here to be at least interesting. Maybe something in the vein of the vaudeville-esque Dolls of Highland by Kyle Craft last year. But instead we just get a bunch of tracks about not doing what everyone else does and carving out your own lane. Which is fine, but again, not what I wanted to hear on an album like this. Couple that with the fact that pretty much every single song here runs way too long, and you have a record that is solid and has some good ideas, but probably pales in comparison to the rest of their discography. I'm sure that plenty of Queens of the Stone Age fans adore this album, but for me, as a casual listener, it's a disappointment, netting a light 6 out of 10. Harsh? Maybe, but I don't feel the need to ever return to this album. But don't worry, if you thought that me berating one of your favorite bands was bad, you're about to get a lot more angry. You know, I was genuinely curious to hear this. Say what you will about Fifth Harmony and their collection of terrible singles, but their weakest member has always been Camila Cabello, who eventually left the group after finding solo success. And all I can say is good riddance. Leave her to make shit with Machine Gun Kelly and move on. And yes, while everyone has already made the joke that Fifth Harmony decided to call this album their first one as a 4-person group after the name of their original collective, I've honestly never been more interested in one of their projects. Okay, I wasn't anticipating it per se, but I was at least slightly curious. And honestly, this album's not bad. In fact, I may go so far as to call it good for a number of reasons. The first one is that the writing is pretty solid across the board. Okay, they don't stray too far away from their wheelhouse, but it's definitely their album with the fewest cringe-worthy lyrics. On top of that, the hooks are pretty damn solid. I can honestly say that none of these songs are bad, even the weaker ones are just a bit bland. Now with that said, even though there aren't any incredible lows on this album, there aren't any great highs either. Sure, we have some really good songs like Sauced Up, Messy, and especially Deliver, but nothing that really blew me away, which is not helped by production which sounds really cheap for an album that must have cost quite a bit. But still, by Fifth Harmony standards, this is easily their best album. And while this may really piss off the Queens of the Stone Age and Everything fans, it's a solid 6 out of 10. This one surprised me, gotta admit, I enjoyed it more than I expected. So to balance things out, here's an album where I got exactly what I expected. talked about anticipating all the albums that I've already discussed in this video, none were as guaranteed to work for me as this one was. For one, the War on Drugs' last album, Lost in the Dream, was a massive critical darling in 2014, running away with more Album of the Year spots and accolades than any other, and you could definitely see why, as the album explores the haze of life in absolutely gorgeous melodic fashion, exploring fantastic Springsteen-esque instrumentation that swept many listeners, including myself, off of their feet. And for another, the singles building up to this album's release gave me the impression that this band wasn't planning to change their sound in any way, despite having signed to Atlantic Records. And like I said, with Everything Everything and Queens of the Stone Age, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And unlike Brockhampton, who took a very similar attitude when approaching Saturation 2, this one worked out tremendously well and stands on its own effortlessly. Hell, if anything, this album actually expands on Lost in the Dream's sound as well as its themes. Thanks to Atlantic's production management, the vocals and the lyrics are much clearer, which can only be a good thing. Many have compared frontman Adam Granduciel's vocals to those of Bob Dylan, and it's a very deserving comparison, as his voice is husky and raw, fitting perfectly over this sweeping instrumentation that evokes images of rural America and sweeping through the countryside in the best possible way. This is an absolutely wonderful love letter to Americana music, a sonic tapestry like few others that I've heard in the past few years. And yeah, these songs do run long, but every single moment feels like pure ecstasy, with surprisingly catchy hooks and melodies all the way to the end of the album, driven by incredible electric guitars, drums, strings, and even harmonicas, with several absolutely excellent solos sprinkled throughout. The only song that feels just a little bit too basic here is the opener, Up All Night, and even then, while the composition was a little repetitive, it was still gorgeous. And while there's no song here that is quite as much of an immediate classic as Red Eyes from their last album, there are still some jaw-dropping tunes here. It really is a marvel. In terms of sheer sonic epicness, this is probably the strongest example that I've heard since Panopticon's Autumn Eternal in 2015. And in all honesty, it may just be better. This album really is stunning. So, to no one's surprise, it's an easy 9 out of 10, and I'm imploring all of you to please go give this a listen. For all of you who tore me apart on my Harry Styles review earlier this year, to me, this is what a true rock masterpiece should sound like. So, if for nothing else, at least give it a listen to understand where I'm coming from. So, thank you guys for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. I've got another record roundup written. It should be going up soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. In the meantime, please post in the comments any more albums that you would like me to check out before the end of the year, or tweet them at me at The Social Tune, link in the description. Please subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is The Social Tune, signing off.